sense of soul.
Hey Soul Seekers, it's Shanna. Journey with me to discover how people around the world awaken to their true sense of soul. Now go grab your coffee. Open your mind, heart, and soul.
It's time to awaken.
Today on Sense of Soul, we have Mark Beale. He is a practitioner and certification trainer of hypnotherapy, past life regression between lives, and spirit releasement with his Past Life Awakening Institute. He's also the author of Past Life Awakening, 7 Regression Case Studies Illustrate 7 Spiritual Laws. He is also the host of the Past Life Awakening podcast. Please welcome Mark Beale.
Well, great to be here. Appreciate it.
So tell us, how did you get to where you are? Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Okay. Well, I guess I had a conventional background to start off with. So I guess some people have a big spiritual upbringing. I didn't. I didn't even really think about it. I wasn't an atheist, but I was interested I would say sort of intellectually, I had intellectual curiosity. So I'm not sort of overcoming a series of beliefs. I was just curious, but I was also quite into the conventional world as it was. So I followed a path where I got an economics degree, went to university, went traveling, read books. But then out of that intellectual curiosity, I found myself at age 25 in India. And so some of the books that I'd read had been, like existentialism or Schopenhauer or something, or Albert Camus, getting into some of these existentialist topics. So I didn't have and I've become a healer, but I didn't have a particular specific thing to heal. I now teach and do past life regression, but I didn't have an opposite to that I've had to awaken from. To me, the issues that I've had to face were like just normal existential issues. But it got to the point of me thinking at that point, I'm doing all the right things conventionally, but it feels like there's something missing, you know? And so it was at that point so what is the trigger or prompt to awaken? I think can be part of that question. And there was just that feeling that there was something, and I probably wouldn't have known it or put into those terms then, but I was guided to having these experiences. And when I did, they then blew the walls off. So I had experiences basically going to meditation retreats in India, sitting in meditation and going, where's this been all my life? And why does it seem so familiar? But also why I'd never really thought about it, in any of these terms. And so that became sort of a strong awakening moment that changed my life, from a conventional life to one that has now since then. And so we're talking 27 years ago. So I was like 25, 26. I'm now 52. And it was from them. It took me 7 or 8 years to integrate the experiences that I had in the first year or two that blew the walls off, so to say. And I've been now 20 years as a past life regression hypnotherapist, which is not something I would have ever thought, earlier on that I'd become, but that's what happened.
So did you believe in past lives? Since you weren't spiritual, I grew up Catholic, so that was definitely not in the book.
Yeah, well, so that's the thing. I didn't really believe or disbelieve. I
Right.
didn't really have a strong opinion either way.
Okay.
I did,
So just
I just hadn't. Well, the thing was, I hadn't really thought about it, but I knew that I didn't know,
Mm,
or I knew that I hadn't done the research. And so
right.
this is one of the things that interests me, where people have an opinion, like
Right.
I believe or I don't believe. It's like, how? On what basis?
Well, and you
And
have to
like,
unwire that if you do believe it.
exactly, yeah. And so we've been indoctrinated in some way. So I felt that I was indoctrinated into just conventional society, which was also, I grew up in New Zealand, which doesn't have much of a religious tradition necessarily. We're kind of free and forgotten down there and just doing our own thing. We weren't pilgrims coming
Right.
to, escape religious freedom, or we don't have 5,000 years of Hinduism or Sikhism or whatever it is.
Right.
And so we were I was just sort of curious and interested in anything, but I didn't believe or disbelieve. So in terms of past lives, it was something I was always curious about, and something I just wanted to study. And so it's always funny to me where people, they're at a young age and they've got a strong opinion whether it's true or not, but what research have you done? You know,
Right. Right.
and to what extent have you studied it and looked into it? And so what I found was I was just intellectually curious, which means knowing that you don't know everything, before you've done any work. And so when I sat and did meditation and when read these books and had these experiences, it became something that and it did take some time. You know, you can still have experiences and still say, what does that mean? But it's something that I did come to think is, and it's still, I think it's useful not to have like really strong opinions about something. I think you can have like really important personal felt experiences, but it's still something that if someone were to get into a debate, you know, it's true or not, I'd say, well, if that's your belief system, well, then that's your truth. I'm not going to say you're wrong.
You're reminding me, and you're speaking on something I asked myself at the beginning of my journey over a decade ago. And I said, how much of what I believe in have I just been told to believe? And of that, how much had I experienced to be my truth? That's kind of what led me to
Mm.
exactly what you're saying. And I hold on to really nothing too tightly anymore, knowing that I may expand at any moment and something else might be my truth.
I love that. And that, yeah, that's kind of where I was at. And that actually started through the travels. Going to somewhere like India, you have an idea of this is how you do things, these are the rules you follow, this is the way life should be. And then you go to India and it's so chaotic in just such a beautiful way that if you go around thinking it shouldn't be like this, it should be like that, you will go insane.
I must say, it was my child that actually opened me up to past life regressions. And I have
Ah.
four children. And of course, my older kids kind of got the more conditioned version mother, and my youngest more open and listening, more present. And one day
Mm,
she said to my oldest daughter and I, she said, did you know that I was an old man once? And she was like 4.
mm,
I think that at first we kind of, whatever, she's being silly. But she was someone that liked princesses and fairy tales, and she wouldn't have wanted to be an old man. So then she kept going, and she knew her name. She knew where she worked, where she was from, and we are like, what? Of
mm.
course, I was like, what is this? This is really like not her character to like make up something. And she was serious. And if you prompted questions, if she didn't know it, she just didn't know. And so I started looking into it and I came across Brian Weiss, his books, and read them all. And then I scheduled my first one because I wanted to understand what she was experiencing.
Your own personal regression.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, you bring up that's sort of 2 points. There's so Brian Weiss wrote about it, and so that's adults can recall past lives. But what you're talking about with your child is
Yeah.
Dr. Ian Stevenson wrote a series of books about children who remember their past lives. And that's often cited by people who do come from a conventional background and sort of buy into it.
Hmm.
And then they want to have some sort of proof. And that's the kind of thing, like when you're saying, she had no reason to do it. It doesn't really make sense. There was no she didn't embellish it. It's not as if it would have given her any positive status or something.
No.
And so that's something that, and he was a researcher, a professor in the university in Virginia, and he found that with hundreds of cases around the world. But what tends to happen then is that they have this at 4 years old, up to about 7 years old. What they then find is that the children, it fades away and then
Yeah.
they forget, and then those stories are over. And then if they were to be 25 and they would have, and you would, in fact, can let me ask you, what happened when you like did that? What happened with her memories? At what point did she stop saying that? And when you ask her about it as an adult or a teenager now, does she
Mhm.
remember it and what does she think about it?
Well, what's interesting is that there were little things that would happen. Like one time she was outside in the front yard and it was very icy. And she
Okay.
was like, oh, I love to ice skate. And I was like, but you've never ice skated before. And she goes, oh, I know how to do it. Or one time in the back of the car talking to her friends, she's talking about how
Mm.
beautiful Central Park is. And this is like maybe when she was like 10. I said, well, you've never been to Central Park. And like her dream vacation was go to New York. We have no family there. We have no connection there. So there were these little things over the years that stuck out that New York was always a big deal. And it just slowly went away. Now, if we brought it up to her, I think she would laugh at us and tell us, you guys are silly.
But she wouldn't remember it or necessarily believe it or.
She's 13, so she's really moved into that ego, wanting
Mm.
to, be like everybody else. And so she had many spiritual things about her when she was little, and all of them, she's kind of like, eh. Hopefully they come back.
Yeah, well, that is really typical of what happens, and I see this with a lot of students or clients that come. I've done 5,000 regression sessions at least with people, and they have spiritual experiences like this, discount it at some point,
Yeah.
but then reconnect with it. And so there's awakening, but you're sort of reawakening to an awakening that you had when you were a child. And so it's kind of the same for me as well. So I was talking about India can sort of drive you crazy because it's so against all the cultural conditioning that we've had, as a teenager wanting to fit in and all of this stuff. But once you get past that, and so for some people, they just go, well, I don't like this country and leave, and they go and they never come back. But for me, it was something where this is so crazy. I love the fact that it's breaking down this conditioning, make me question things. But now, as I break through that initial resistance, I really see the beauty of it, and I really love it and resonate with it for whatever reason. And then I start to realize, well, that's because, like I had this dream to go there, like your daughter wants to go to New York. I kind of had this draw towards India. And when I got there, it was a weird, complete difference to what I was used to, but it was also weirdly exactly the same time and not a contradiction, very familiar.
Right. And I think a lot of people have that to places or eras, different eras. They're like really attracted to like the Vikings or something. And I have that from where I'm from, even though I'm in Colorado. I'm originally from New Orleans. And I did do my ancestry. I'm very deeply rooted there. So that could be too. But
Mm.
I have this very strong soul connection. When I leave there, I cry. I mean, and when I get there, I cry because I know I'm going to leave. There's this soul connection and it's undeniable. It's so powerful. It's almost like the love for a child in some way. I mean, like that strong. Actually, I'm going to go back up. I did my past life regression before I did my ancestry, very
Oh,
around the same year. However, it was my second one. I was in Louisiana on a plantation, all these things. Then fast forward, I learned deeply about my ancestry. I studied it for 8 years, but at the beginning, I learned I'm French Creole. So what that means is I have slavery in my tree. And I was like, as I'm reading and learning about it, it's like I could remember, and it was like everything in my past life regression was like becoming real. So I saw a connection between ancestry and past lives. It
mm.
hasn't been all of them, but that one's the strongest one.
Yeah, well, my question would be, so there's a connection between past lives and ancestry. What about the connection to this life issues or events or feelings or emotions that you're carrying over?
Well, you won't believe this. So in this life, I know someone, not super close, but like God, I know you, right? Connected very much. My dad died on the same day as his mom died here in this life. And we're both from New Orleans, actually, which coming to Colorado, that's really far for people from, from New Orleans. Usually people stay in New Orleans. So you
Mm.
always kind of find that common ground. He looks a lot like my brother in real life. There's a lot of weird things. In my regression, he was in it. And then I found out years later, that we're actually related 10 generations under a plantation owner. Like my DNA almost proves it.
Yeah. Was there anything particularly that prompted you to have that the session? Any presenting issues that you're wanting to work through? Is it or just curiosity or?
Yeah, pure curiosity, absolute curiosity. But it helped me understand a lot of what I was about to go through with my ancestry and, the suppression of women. And that seems to be also a reoccurring pattern within all of my past lives. Whether I'm a male or female, there's always this suppression of women. And I feel like in this life, that's something that I really worked on also in my ancestry. But I'm definitely breaking that one.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. So when people come to me for sessions, they curiosity actually for whatever reason, I think maybe I sort of discourage it a little bit, to be honest. Or people will go to other people for that because I really think of myself as a healer and I like people to bring in strong emotions. And so sometimes people will not know that they're presenting issues. So it's really interesting. You said it helped me with things that were going to come up instead of normally it's like I've been going through this in the last few years, and so people often suppress themselves as a healer, for example. Like
Yeah.
I can't be a healer because it goes against this conventional world where intellectuals are put on and scientists are put on a pedestal. And 400 or 500 years ago, we had an enlightenment, which was a renaissance, which is we got rid of superstition And we brought in the scientists and the writers and looked up to them, and we looked down on, in a way, the metaphysicians and the spiritual people, and we would crucify the religious thousands of years ago, or we would burn the witches hundreds of years ago. So a lot of people carry witches' wounds, and witch is also another feminized term. And of course, women have been in this planet over a lot of history have been suppressed. And so a lot of people carry so asking those questions, what kind of issues or residues, and probably 90% of the people that I work with as students, as clients are women. So it's rare for me to work with men, rarely. And so women face the conditioning in this life. It's changing a lot in these generations, but certainly there's a lot of, if you want to be, you can be a nurse, you can be a teacher, you can be that's kind of the choices. A lot of that's changed. And so I think a lot of people incarnating at this time have residues from this life, and ancestrally, just like my mother, my grandmother said, that a woman's place is here and there. And the grandchildren are saying, well, I'm going to do this and that anyway.
I got one for you.
Yes, exactly. I love it. Fantastic. And that's an antidote to, 500 years or thousands of years of conditioning. And it's one of the biggest waves and characteristics, I think, of this stage of consciousness in a way. And sort of the standing up of the feminine. And so that is something that if we can carry the weight of limiting beliefs or heavy emotions that I'm not allowed to express myself spiritually, or I'm not allowed to express the feminine because that has been suppressed. And so that's something that people often need to be able to have the liberation to be able to stand in their own power, whether it's spiritually or whether it's in, I'm 5'4" and you're 6'2". Well, before, and when things were really grossly physical, that mattered. But things have changed so much that being a boss or being a leader you don't need to be the strongest, tallest person on the battlefield. We've got more advanced ways of expressing ourselves now. And you can do that in either body. So I think a lot of people, are powerful souls, are taking incarnations in the female form to be able to,
reclaim the power.
yeah.
You said something earlier. Your integration sometimes took years. This happens for me big time. I mean, I can tell you my story all in 5 minutes. However, it took years for that understanding. And there was these rememberings, dreams that also went along with my past life regressions that you could puzzle together, but it did take a long time. What did that look like for you, and what do you see in your clients?
Yeah, it depends really what the presenting issues are and the path that you're on. And so now you're at a path where did you feel like if 25 years ago someone had said to you, you're going to be doing a spiritually orientated podcast talking to the world about all of your woo-woo beliefs and going public with it, how would you feel?
That would have not been for me.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's part of that integration process. So the question is, to what extent do we need to be integrated? Because it's one thing to have a personal spiritual experiences that might change you. So for example, I could have gone to a meditation retreat when I was 26 and gone back to the office and worked in investment banking as a nicer person. Whether or not you can do that in that industry is another question. But
Right.
but either way, it could have been a private thing that was a sort of a nice thing, an experience that I had while traveling. And I just sort of continue on with my life, but sort of changed a bit emotionally and spiritually with a few more nuances, but still basically live the same kind of life. Then that integration would have been shorter and easier. And I didn't have big issues. So a lot of people go traveling because they're recovering from a divorce, or their whole life's breaking down, or their whole industry's changed and they got fired and they don't know what to do. For me, everything was good. I had a good job, things were going well. I was connected socially, and I had no problems in any aspect of life really. Just this little question of, if everything's so great, why do I feel like something's missing when clearly it isn't, because everything that you're supposed to need or want to satisfy you is here, but then I feel that something isn't. So there's really that existential quest for me. So that was my presenting issue. And then the outcome that I wanted to get to was to be a full-time professional healer and person who speaks on this. So when I was 25, there's no way I thought I'd be talking about this. In fact, I had friends like that and I thought they're a bit strange. I like them anyway. But now I've become sort of the weirdest one of all in a sense. But the integration that was then required for me to just completely change careers meant that it took me about 8 years from I've never heard of this to now it's my full-time job. And so that's sort of, the outcome and the level that I took it to was, it's about as far as you can get. And for you as well to be, speaking about it, then that's kind of why it takes longer, I think. But if people have, even doing things like recovering from a divorce or looking back on some of their life and what was the meaning that I had, it can be sort of a quicker thing that can help reframe the way that they look at their life.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mean, just even up until like a year or so ago, am I still connecting that very first regression and all of them. I'll be honest with you. Things happen in meditations or in life or in history. I'm like, oh gosh, I knew about that because in my regression, this happened. I learned a lot actually about history through my regressions.
That's great. So was this like 10 years ago or around there?
My very first one was, yeah, over a decade ago. Yeah. And actually I was a nun in Austria and I was a Franciscan nun, had no knowledge or terminology of Franciscan. And that was one of the things that was proven to me. Whoa, I was like, I did not know that. So I don't know where that came from. And then in meditations, there would be this monk that would show up and he never spoke. I just thought it was a joke. I'd go into these groups where they'd say, we're going to connect with our spirit guide, and here he would be. And I'm like, great, I get a mute spirit guide. Like the joke's on me. I mean, this is unbelievable. One time I had a dream and my grandma was there and I said, what's his name? And she said, his name's David. So then I kind of put, this is over years. I mean, years. And one day I see a picture of a Franciscan monk. And I'm like, holy crap, he's a Franciscan monk. And I'm reading, and it says, well, they have a very strong vow of silence or a vow of poverty. Well, in my very first one, I was starving. I said, that makes sense. And then he has a vow of silence, which is still so silly. I get a spirit guide vow of silence. And it was last year, or maybe 2 years now. I had a dream of him and I hadn't in forever. It came out of the nowhere. And I said, oh my gosh, aren't you my spirit guide? And he turned around and he goes, no, you're mine. And it was the first time he ever spoke to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So we're talking before about the wounds that people can have, like a witch's wound or
Yeah.
being shut down and told not to speak through a gender or not to speak up about your religious beliefs. But it's
Ah,
sort of funny that, and so there's sort of that one side of it, but then there's the other side where you take vows to renounce, vows of poverty, vows of silence. No one's telling you to be silent. In fact, you're being encouraged to. So then you start really getting to this interesting idea of, what's good or bad and what's right or wrong. And so is it right to just sort of speak your truth and communicate and tell everybody about all your spiritual stuff? And it may be okay to be silent in some degrees,
well,
you know?
that actually caused me to open my mouth much more.
Yeah, well, but exactly. But there's a time and place for everything. So I love
That's
the fact that you have a vow of silence. But this is another thing about vows. I think people get into trouble, and this is one thing that in past life regression, some of the healing we do is people take vows like I'm going to, I'll go on a retreat for these years, or I'll be a monk for this life. But then, so I had the same thing. I had a past life as a monk, and then I come into this life and I'm born into a world which says consume, invest, make money. And I'm looking at it going, shouldn't we be saving up for the things that money can't buy?
right.
Because a lot of the things that you think are valuable, like money or gold, it looks like fool's gold to me. I don't see a lot of wisdom in it. That's something that I started to question. The whole thing in economics is you're trying to value assets and have the appropriate pricing. And therefore, if there's underpricing, you buy something. And so for me, I realized that nothing that we were trying to value or price from an economic sense had real value because it wasn't a wisdom or a soulfulness that was going to be something we could take with us beyond this body, which is, if you believe the world's finite, then that's all there is. And all that there is the conventional and material, then that valuation equation makes sense. But I had that sense somewhere that spiritually we were undervaluing the things that we cannot grasp or measure or weigh or value. And so that's something that, but I then sort of became a bit of a renunciant. And when you're integrating, part of it is, when you're being told you can't say things like that, or that you're in conflict with the conventional wisdom, then you're wrong, or you need to not say that. But then you can run the risk of then over speaking. But then that last part can be that how do you resolve that? And so you can go from one extreme to another. And so I bought some of that. I was sort of reconnecting with that past life monk energy. And you can't, but I'm not a monk in this life. So
Right.
coming in and being a complete renunciant doesn't make sense because I don't have the spiritual community to support me. So then that integration means finding that balance. So how do I not, follow an acquisitive path, just, chasing fool's gold, but also realizing I'm not a monk now. And maybe I did take a vow of silence or a vow of poverty, but I don't have to keep that vow forever, and I can modify it so that I can survive as a healer without going broke, which a lot of people do. Yeah.
I mean, I did, kind of connect it with what I was, again, what I was about to go through. How weird. So that's another one. This happened prior to Sense of Soul, even the podcast.
Yeah.
Then my journey through the Gnostic Gospels and speaking up very much against religion. So, whoa.
Yeah. Well, I love the fact that he took a vow of silence, but then he did speak. And so, like, these vows that we take are not something that are in perpetuity forever and bind us. So that vow of silence is something you're giving yourself a peace and an opportunity for space, but you're not taking away your ability to speak when you need to. And so to me, there's a real powerful message in that I'm a silent guy who spoke, and it's so that it's undoing that apparent dualistic contradiction, and it's sort of liberating. And I also love the fact that we can place things above us. So in my book, I've got 7 spiritual laws, and one of the laws is duality. And you think, well, shouldn't that be non-duality? Because isn't that more spiritual? But I think we have to, that's nice. But as a healer, we have to face the fact that we're in a really dualistic universe that has this is right and that's wrong. And we have to acknowledge it and face it head on and deal with it and then eventually transcend it. And also that helps us because with duality, we can have right or wrong, but we can have higher or lower. We can get really drawn into somebody's above me and then we sort of look up to them. But ultimately, we can transcend this idea of self and other, in which case we're all one, in which case there's nothing higher or lower than us. And so I love the fact that your guide is there and he's saying, you can put me on a pedestal if you want to, but which a lot of us do. And that's part of why I think people rebel against religion because they're told this is above you. And we sort of realize that we can have a more one-to-one or unified relationship with God and that's, so I love the fact that you're his guide.
It's so interesting because I feel like everyone that I have had has been a part of my journey, here in this life in some way. And I just realized for the very first time, those first two really were preceding, what I was going to go through. So are all the lives that we connect with, are these all here or coming up, showing up to teach us something along our journey and help us awaken?
Yeah, I think so. Because you think I think there are a lot of lives that you can access. And with any life, there's a lot of times and events that we can access as well.
Mhm.
So then the question is, why is it that that particular life and that particular moment in that life, if there are 80 years in a life, I mean, how do you choose a particular moment? And it's because there's a root cause. And that's why I ask about, even curiosity, but I think you did know, or you were being guided towards, you may not know why you want to have the session, but it's because of things that are going to happen. So of course, you can't say, I need to do this because of what's going to happen next year, you know, or
Right.
at a subconscious level, maybe you do, but normally it's because, so for example, even for me, the jump into full-time work as a healer, and I can still doubt. I think I can still accept that I think past lives are literal, but there's a difference between the Dalai Lama saying that he has past lives or the Buddhists say there are past lives. But what does that mean in terms of actual practical action? And that's where books like Brian Weiss, and that became something, it's not just the idea of reincarnation, it's the actual practice of regressing into your past lives to find root causes. And those root causes may be holding you back. But like you say, there may also be connections to places that you've loved, things that you've learned before, and then you're remembering them. and they can be helpful. So for me, there was one time just as I was finishing my certification and graduation, I was thinking, well, I've got the certification, but does that mean this becomes a profession? And I went into a past life where I was in India at 500 years ago. And I remembered meeting a spiritual teacher and having an awakening and thinking, this is great. And it was in my early 30s in in the past life. And it was also my early 30s in this life when I was having that regression. And in this life, I'd met the Dalai Lama himself and shook his hand and felt, wow, that was part of the things when I was 25, 26, where it really made me feel like I don't think he's lying. When he says past lives are real, and I looked him in the eye and I shook his hand and I felt his energy, and I was listening to his teachings from his other disciples and masters who were teaching me, and I thought, I don't think these guys are lying to me. I don't think they have any incentive to do it. And everything that I'm experiencing on the inside is kind of validating it, and it just seems so sort of native and natural to me anyway. They're expressing what I haven't been able to express internally my whole life, although I didn't know it.
Did that lead you to making the decision?
It did. And so, but I still had that question. Okay, so that's part of the religious understanding, but do I just go back to my life and with knowing that? Or do I go and practice and be a full-time professional healer? So what I remembered was in my past life, I had all those great opportunities, and there was a big parallel between this life and past life. But then I went forward 20 years into the future, and I was in my early 50s in that past life. And I noticed that I thought, oh, great, I've had all these spiritual awakenings. I wonder what cool things I'm going to do. And I realized I didn't do anything. I was complacent. I was comfortable. I sort of had a nice position. I wasn't so rich that I had responsibility, but I wasn't poor that I had to like do a lot of work. I could just sort of cruise through life and think, oh, I'll go and do the cool. I had the opportunity to meet healers and teachers and to walk the spiritual path if I wanted to. I was free enough, but I didn't take the opportunity. And I felt then in my 50s, in that past life, a deep sense of regret, like just like a visceral stabbing in my chest kind of a regret. Like I thought I'll do it tomorrow, and then 20 years went by and I didn't do anything. I
Wow.
just I've just felt such a regret that I didn't take the action to integrate it and have the courage to follow that path. I sort of took the easy way out and just sort of cruised through life and didn't do too much. And so that feeling that I had when I came back, I brought that feeling into being 32 in this life. And I just felt, I do not want to feel that feeling again. If you got the opportunity to do it and you don't do it, and that has actually fueled me throughout this life. The idea that I could have all these opportunities and get to meet him in person, that a lot of people, you spend lifetimes trying to get that opportunity. And if you don't make the most of it, so that's another thing. People could think past lives, oh, if I miss this life, I'll just do it again. The fact that we have future lives does not discount in any way the preciousness of this life and the responsibility that we have to make the most of it and to have the courage to do the hard things and to stand up. And if someone says you can't do it because of this reason, or you're going to stand out and be criticized for doing that, or it's going to be risky, you're going to make a lot less money than you could have, and all of those things. But if you say, no, I understand what's of true value, and I'm not going to worry too much about what other people's opinions of things when they haven't really done much research. I'm going to do my own research, and if I find out that it's something that I can live with and sleep with, then I'm going to go ahead and do it. And so now I've sort of awoken 20 years later, with this storytelling. It took me 20 years I read Brian Weiss's book, over 20 years ago, and thought, I'd like to write a book like that one day. Took me 20 years to have a lot of the experiences, but it is something now where I think that's an important thing as well. So yeah, so that past life for me, it connected a visceral emotion and it spoke to me and helped shape this life.
Okay.
You know.
So you're looking for that emotion because I know you asked me that when I was telling you about that very first regression I had, or the second one I had. So, but there's
Yeah.
also these rememberings that we have. And this happens to me all the time. And I just find it to just be the most divine thing. I'm like, I know that. I don't know how I know this, but I know that. You know, Do you think that they're connected to past lives, or do you think it's like just maybe I'm connecting into the universal, consciousness? I mean, of course, it could be many things, but also dreams are also aligned with that, as I've mentioned, and have continued to always like something will spark something within a past life regression or a dream, vice versa, and then they work together. Is that common?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you're talking about, I think there's an inner wisdom and a kind of
Mhm.
an infinite wisdom and a transcendent wisdom. And that has a lot of ways of expressing itself. So
Yeah.
just that there's knowing. And so even that question, like, how do we know which specific moment in a past life to go to? And so, so a lot of dreams can be quite random and just venting or processing. But
Mhm.
some dreams can be really significant. They've got an emotion and a deep meaning. And so sometimes it can be just sort of a random nonsense. Sometimes it can have make a profound sense and be a profound message. So when you go into regression, it is actually kind of like a dream state. It's like sort of being asleep and dreaming, except your body's awake and you can watch yourself dreaming. So it's like having a vivid dream. And but then the question is, how do you then tune into, and how does your mind know which is the parable or teaching story you need to learn from your past lives? And that's kind of that wisdom part. It has that knowing that takes you to those moments and then tells you that story and gives you that feeling and gives you that teaching that helps you then integrate your experiences and move forward. So it's definitely all linked in. So when you're doing past life regression, that kind of inner knowing is really helpful to find the root cause events and to then understand what they mean and why they're coming up. So as a past life therapist, sometimes I have to really help people understand and sort of explain it to them and interpret for them in some ways. Sometimes people, you just sit back and they figure it all out for themselves. But most often, there's a bit of both, where you can point out certain things and say, "Did you notice what happened? Was it was that connects to this and that, and the story you told me about all this life." So sometimes people can really join the dots themselves, but a lot of times it's helpful to have help with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because then I wouldn't have waited for years. Because I mean, if you don't have that, then it could take a long time to figure out these things. And I feel like that was me. So, have you ever experienced that someone cannot do a past life regression or cannot get there?
It's very rare. So there's to me that starts off with a karmic connection to any of this. So if anybody's watching this podcast, they probably have a karmic connection to spiritual awakening and
Yeah.
to past lives. So I dare say there are people who would never watch anything like this or would never approach me.
Yeah.
Like maybe it's never in their cards for them to experience past lives. But I've got such a filtered kind of audience or people come to me. So by the time people come to me and think, so there probably are people who couldn't experience it, but I'd never meet them. So the people who do come to me and say, I don't know if I can do it or not, I sort of just tend to laugh and go, well, like they'll often say, I'm worried that I can't do it. And I'll say, well, I'm not worried. You
Yeah.
came up here, you've told me all this about you and your life and all the other things you've done. And they go, oh, thank you for believing in me. And it's just, knowing what I know, people who have a background and a connection to these kind of things can do it. But I sort of like the fact that there's sort of a humility, and people as well who maybe wouldn't feel connected to this. They're the same people who feel extremely confident that past lives don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, they're kind of creating that reality. But I love the fact that there's some doubt. I don't know if I could do it. And I look at them and go, well, of course you can,
Yeah.
and but just that little doubt is kind of, I think, speaks well of some people as well. So it's sort of like there's a humility and knowing what you don't know and just sort of being curious. And you don't know until you really do it. But certainly, if people are thinking, I wouldn't even dare approach somebody because I can't do it or I'm not good enough, I'd say, well, just notice that thought. And that may be one of the emotions or issues you can look at. But by the time people get in front of me, and I do have an intake process as well, so I'll discuss with people. But it's very rare people that would either get to that and not be able to do it. But so basically, pretty much anybody who sincerely approaches me and wants past life regression can experience their past lives.
I think so. Because I would have told you this is no way, I would have never had anything like that, because I'm deeply rooted Catholic. So that was something that I had to, really heal within myself. But you also teach this, which I love that. This is the journey that I find that most of my guests have. It's like they experience something for themselves. They, see the benefits and they're like, I'm not just going to keep this for myself. Like you said, I'm going to, share this with others. So you actually do train people to do past life regressions. I took one time, me and my best friend Mandy, who used to podcast with me, we took some quick past life regression class together online. And actually, my very first regression, always use my children as my guinea pigs so they get to experience all the weird woo-woo stuff. But what happened is we actually didn't get to a past life. So as my oldest daughter, she had been experiencing a reoccurring dream for a long time. And it was very specific. I mean, in her dream, she was naked, alone, and afraid. And she would always wake up with a weird taste in her mouth. And, I thought it'd be fun since she is my daughter. I'll take you through my womb. Well, we don't get much further than that because what happened was when she was born, she was choking on amniotic fluid. And that was the taste in her mouth. And they took her away. She was naked, alone. Like, what I have goosebumps telling you this. Like, she connected it right away. It's the same taste that I have in my dream. She knew it. And I don't think she ever once complained about feeling alone again.
Yeah, so that's an example of regression. I like that example as well because when you do past life regression, I kept coming back. What are the emotions in this life that drew you into past lives? Because that's the key thing. And so that's how sometimes people say I did a past life regression and it didn't blow the walls off or wasn't that amazing. And to me, that's often, well, how much setup did you do? How much looking for visceral, real, powerful emotions and experiences did you set an intention to then go on and explore? Because if you don't do that initial part, if you sort of put in something a bit waffly, then you get out something a bit waffly. But if you spend the time to go to someone who's going to approach, therapeutic, strong emotions and issues and thoughts, then you're going to get those kind of experiences. But the other thing is to not presume that we bypass this life because it's not spiritual and go on to past lives that are spiritual. That we're always creating karma. We're always in spirit and spiritual, whether it's in this life or a past life. And we don't have to necessarily tell our mind, have an intention, we must go into a past life to resolve this. Because often there are really influential things in this life. And you'll often find there's a pattern, like the present moment emotions, something from 30 years ago and something from 300 years ago. And so it's not just what happened 300 years ago. It's, well, because I don't know who I was in my past life. Well, most people don't know who they are in this life, really.
Right. We did end up going into a past life later, which was super
Yeah.
fun, but she needed to get past that. And I just saw that you're so right. We're so multidimensional, so we're gonna have to heal it
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, but what you describe is really typical, and so it does happen, and I love the fact there that maybe she was only alone for a few hours or a few days, but when you're a few days old and you spend 50% of your life alone, then that is all you've known is aloneness. And so this is the funny thing as well. We can think that there must be some big dramatic thing in a past life that's going to explain or be the root cause of our emotions or thoughts. But it's just kind of amazing how just some tiny thing that you'd often overlook. So we might even think that a perpetrator is going to be the person who is the person we have to forgive and is the real source of the problem. But it's often an enabler to the perpetrator that people have a problem with. And
Wow.
that's the big thing. Like, I understand like, that person was just predatory and evil, and that's their problem. But the fact that no one stood up for me is what really hurts, and that's the person I have to process. Or just these little things as well. It may be something that happens, that's a gross suffering, obviously, but there can be sort of subtle criticisms.
Yeah.
Just something physically can happen, but then a word can be spoken, and in the weighing of all things, the person that said the word that can be more damaging. And
Mm.
so, as well, we don't sort of go back and say, like, I know, so you didn't know that there was that traumatic event that you
Oh,
faced. But if
right.
people do know about certain traumas, you don't go back and say, we're going to go back to that trauma and heal that trauma because we know that's the cause. We go back and we know that you're feeling this feeling now. Let's be open to fight. And again, just not presuming to know anything. Just
Right.
going back to how we started this conversation, I don't presume to know that past lives are real or not, and we don't presume to know
Right.
what the cause of the issue is. Even though people can come in and say, "I need to regress to this time and heal it," we can say, "Well, that may come up," but are you open to anything else coming up? And that's again, like what you were saying, what's that inner wisdom and knowing of the subconscious mind?
Mhm.
And so then our intellectual mind can think that we know the answer, but in a hypnotic state, we bypass that part. We have the humility to know that will be guided to where we need to go, and it may surprise us. And that just so often happens. You're so surprised by what comes up, and that speaks to its authenticity. You're not making it up, or it's not predictable.
And I'll never tell you how surprised I was when I looked down and I had webbed feet. I can tell you that much.
Okay. Well, where were you? Were you on this planet or another planet?
I don't know.
Okay.
But I was here, but it was like early civilization.
Okay, so not a humanoid form, but not
Definitely,
necessarily Homo
I was
sapien.
standing as a human and had
Okay.
webbed feet. It was very uncomfortable though. I almost came out. My ego came in, was like, wait a minute. Didn't want to be in that skin. It was very interesting.
Were you, yeah, so that was an initial gut reaction. Did you
It
have
was.
time? Did you have time to process it and find out like what kind of civilization or time you could have been in?
No,
Okay.
no, I didn't. Only because I had already been under for a while, for
Mm,
a long time, and so it was towards the end, and I like seriously almost came out of hypnosis because it's like my ego came in, like I woke up, like basically, to
yeah.
stop from knowing. And I know I need to go back, and actually I'm feeling a lot better. Like before I was like, ugh, I don't want to, I don't know, no. I do feel like there's obviously some healing there. I mean, it came up for a reason.
Do you have a theory of what it might have been?
I do. I do. Yeah.
Do you want to share or take a guess?
Well, I do. So I have done a lot of ancestry. And so it's not that I believe it's in my ancestry, but I've done a lot of study on DNA, on blood types, on different areas, isolated DNA. And I have a lot of that in me, that it could have been like maybe like in Atlantean times is what comes up.
Yeah, well, that's good. And so that's often so what you're saying is familiar to me. So this is the kind of thing that so I'd say that's a typical pattern in a way. I didn't want to lead you. So notice I could have
Yeah.
asked you, do you think you could have been at Atlantis?
Oh,
But I didn't
really?
want what
Stop. Are you
well,
serious?
no, but of course. No, but that's why I went out of my way not to ask that question. And so this is one thing when you're doing past life regression, you don't want to lead the person and put that idea in their mind. And so I
All
said, "Do
right.
you have a theory about what it is?" And so I want to see if your theory is the same as mine, or if it's a theory that I can sort of see could make sense in some way or another. And so I didn't want to say that could be Atlantean, but that also comes back to kind of a witch's wound. So we know in the, 400, 500 years of human history that's been an issue. But if you go back 5,000 years, then, or 10,000, 10, 20,000 years, whenever that happened, then that is something a lot of people, I carry that kind of wound as well. So in my book, it's actually the first case study. She's now a psychiatrist, and she has to deal with the weight of psychiatry telling her that past lives and spirituality is weird and that it's against her training. And she remembered actually being a child where she tried to save a mouse, but the mouse died. And she felt like, I want to save people and help beings. But when I tried to save this animal, it died. And I meet a lot of Franciscans, by the way, who's, the silence is because St. Francis of Assisi spoke with the animals. But now he's not using human language. So it's no big deal to not speak human language. It's because he's really connected with the animals. And so this psychiatrist was connected with animals as a child, and there's an innocence children have to that connection. But she remembered actually being in the Wild West, being a medical doctor, wishing that she was a psychiatrist. But before that, she was in Lemuria, and she felt, and the Lemuria went under the waves when she was a teenager, and she felt that she was responsible for its demise. So this is another thing people carry, just particularly in this stage of consciousness, people are carrying the wound of I want to arise and speak my spiritual truths, But what happened when we had other spiritual orientated societies and they have this great love for spirituality because of all the things they learned in Atlantis or Lemuria, but then they have these conflicting emotions like that. I learned a lot there, but I also experienced a lot of pain or there were bad things. So you've got all these positive residues of all these abilities that I remember, and it's so familiar and I love it, but it also carries a weight of a chaos or a pain. And so
Yeah.
you have then you have to integrate and resolve these residues. And so to me, for you to have it at the end of the session, it's a legitimate thing to say, let take a break. But one thing you can do is to, and I'll train people on this, is that if you get something like that, it's fine to have something we can pick up where we left off. But can you give us a clue as to what this web feet mean? What civilization may it be linked to, and what emotions or lessons may it be that it's coming up now to tell us? And it can be that kind of thing where that will often happen if you've done 3 sessions with a beginning, middle, and end, and you think it's done, but then you realize, but then this thing came up at the end and it made me realize I needed to do some past life or between life work or to look at this. And so it's sort of on one hand, it's like a negative because it made me feel like, oh, I thought I was finished and then I just got this thing at the end. But it's sort of just, it's that little thing to remind you, maybe a bit of a rude awakening sometimes, but hey, this is something and it's serious enough because you're getting that emotional reaction to it enough that I do need to, like you said, like it does sort of need some healing. It's not just, oh, I could find out what those web feet were, but it doesn't really matter, who cares? But it was, I need to because there's a visceral reaction to it. And so you can take that as a bad thing, but it can also be like a powerful thing that is, again, just like the regret that I had. It's a powerful thing that makes you keep going and not stop short,
Wow.
or at least take the
Huh.
most of the opportunities you got.
And just asking those questions made me think, right? Just that moment, which no one's ever asked me. And so then it was like all these things were there, and so I have thought about it, of course, but I've kind of just left it here. It's just
Okay.
here. There's nothing, there's no solution, so I know I have to go back there for sure. I have a question. So your book has 7 regressions, it has 7 spiritual laws. Are
Yeah.
these regressions, these examples, actual situations applying these 7 spiritual laws?
Yeah, it's partly actually. So I do these sessions, but I also teach people as well. So if I'm giving past life regression sessions to people, I don't need to explain to them, what these laws are and how they've come up. But I think for people, but it's the same thing. Like you just described in a regression experience you had, but it's that whole thing. Like, how do I interpret it? What do I learn from it? What do I get from it? What do I need to do about it? And how do I piece it together? So a lot of people will have had past life regression sessions and got a lot out of them, but these spiritual laws are a way, even for me, of looking back. I've probably been practicing it for 10 years without having being able to put this into concrete form. So it's
Hmm.
just sort of another way of like having another level of really understanding what it is that's happening here. And it's also a way for me to communicate to my students or anyone who's learning or wanting to understand past life regression deeply, like what it is. And so you can then start to use that language with people and describing things. But I think it's something that helps, it's also part of that integration process because the experiences we have can be very visceral. You can have downloads in split seconds of a lot of wisdom and knowing, but how if you had to write that out into paragraphs and pages, how would it go? And so that's part of the integration process, is integrating something that's beyond words and ineffable into something that you can put down. And for in religion it's religious experience and then scripture, and in past life regression, you have all these sort of various experiences, but there are common laws and common ways of understanding it. So I wanted to be able to put down this model or framework for understanding what's happening here at a deeper level. And it's also about, not just very specifically, I had this emotion of guilt or fear, and how do I resolve it? But ultimately, what does that mean? It's ultimately awakening to not just, I had a fear of a difficulty in this relationship, and now my relationship with that person is better, so great. But once you do that by realizing that I had some fear about my relationship because I felt unsafe with them, because I felt afraid that they might kill me, which doesn't make sense because they probably won't kill me in this life, but they kill my ego, or they'll kill my career, but they actually did kill me in a past life. And so then I awaken to the idea that, and but then you review, like your daughter relived almost dying when she was being born, but then you can relive being killed in a past life, and then you see what happens as you die, and you come out of past life regressions with a lot less fear of death.
Hmm.
When you have less fear of death and less fear of significant authoritative people who you put above you, then you have a lot less fear about everything.
Mm.
And then you're a lot more free to do whatever it is you want, whatever profession, say what you want to say. And so you go and heal this specific little wound regarding a person or a profession, but then that heals so much. And then you awaken to resolving all existential fears.
So every time we are reincarnating, we're bringing into our life the things that we have not resolved, bringing in fears, maybe that were not dealt with or that affected us. Do you see or have you heard of anyone ever bringing in anything physical? I mean, I've heard this before, like maybe the eyes never change. I've heard that one before. Or birthmarks. Like I know my little one, the one who was in New York, she has a birthmark right in the middle of her palm.
Yeah, the eyes never change. I like that. There's a really great movie called Eye Origins. It's actually my number one video on my YouTube channel. I did
Okay.
an explanation of that movie, and so they sort of it's about a scientist who does prints of people's irises,
Yeah.
and the idea is you can match iris patterns, and that's how you can tell who someone was in a past life. Now, for me, that's a nice idea, but not really how it works. But in my opinion, but what you can do is you can be in a past life and you can look people in the eye, and I think
Oh,
the eye is the mirror to the soul.
yes.
Because like people will say, "Oh, there's a person there and they're killing me," and I'll go, "Who is it?" And they go, "I don't know." And I say, "Take a moment, look at their eye, look at the triangle of their eye and their forehead, their two eyes, look into their energy." And then they look into the eyes of the person in their past life, and then they go, "Oh my God, it's that person."
I get it. So you're looking
Yeah,
really through their eyes, to see
absolutely.
the connection.
And the eyes are the mirror to the soul,
Love
not
it.
necessarily the iris is a tangible
Yeah.
pattern that you can sort of photograph and match. So
Yeah.
for me, but yeah, I mean, it's a nice idea. But then, and then physically, yeah, I do have an example of the book where someone carried a physical wound, uh, and and it actually does happen quite a lot. So
And I bet you have learned so much through your clients.
absolutely. Even as I teach my students, I certainly for the first few years, it's amazing how much clients will bring you the issues and that you need to work through as a therapist.
Yeah.
And so, and that, the same happens. So, like as a teacher, one of the reasons to teach is that's another way to just continue to learn.
So do you work with people via Zoom? I mean, you must love that we can have technology. And I know that for myself, I've done, virtual sessions. They're just as powerful. There's no, such thing as time and space when it comes to energy. And so, yeah,
Absolutely, yeah. It's if you told me 20 years ago when I started this, I would have like thought, well, I'm old school.
right,
I like to do it in person, and for like the first 15 years, I didn't do a single remote session.
right.
But it's literally, I had this great idea. Like I did some online courses that people can get. I started making them 2017, and I took like a little holiday and went to Nepal and sort of sat by Lake Poker and like did some writing and stuff and gave myself some time off. And then I thought maybe I'll start mentoring people because but I was also teaching classes in person.
Mhm.
But then I thought maybe I'll do this online, and I launched my that mentoring online in January 2020,
Wow.
thinking thinking that in the next 5 to 10 years it may make up half of my work. But obviously, like 3 4 months later, there's quite a
Yeah.
boom, quite a boom in online work. I don't know if you follow the news closely, but sort of event, sort of event in the early 2020, and so since then I haven't looked back, and I've worked exclusively online since then. I was trapped in a country that I just travel constantly anyway, and I was trapped in a country in Asia for 19 months. I couldn't leave, so I didn't
Wow.
have much choice, and now I've got used to it, and yeah.
This is a beautiful way because you learn from this and you grow and you heal. And you're not just healing in this lifetime, many lifetimes. Your soul, is infinite in all times and space. So it's really important. We're not just finite, meat suits.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's so much happening at spiritual levels.
Thank you so much. There's not a lot. I mean, I interview a lot of people that I'm like super excited to jump off with you and go get your book. Thank you, Gavin. I love you. I love Gavin.
Yeah.
And yeah, thank you, Mark, so much for coming on Sense of Soul. Shout out yourself, plug your social media, all that good stuff.
Great. Yeah, my website's Past Life Awakening Institute, YouTube, Past Life Awakening, Instagram, Past Life Awakening.
Awesome. Yeah, really, really enjoyed this conversation. I think you're brilliant. I love what you do. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and your book.
Fantastic. Likewise. Thanks so much.
Sense of Soul.
Thanks for listening to Sense of Soul podcast, and thanks to our special guest. If you want more of Sense of Soul, check out my website at senseofsoulpodcast.com.